Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi. That's right, I decided it was time to take an on screen persona. And it's that time again. It's midweek, and I want you to play some magic so you can win 2 free rare or better ICRs. This year, Midweek Magic's goal appears to be helping us explore different formats each week, and that's exactly what we're going to do. In fact, we're talking about Explorer this week, and we are not only going to dip a toe into this in a very budget friendly way, but we are also going to establish ourselves in the most stable format on Arena and allow us to grow at our own pace while remaining competitive in the format. But before we get into all that, allow me to do the awkward thing and promote the channel. A while back, one of my viewers was kind enough to point out that we are the only channel putting out timely midweek magic content. So be sure to subscribe right here at the Planeswalker Stronghold for all of your future midweek magic needs, because we will be bringing you a deck list or strategy every single week. So what do you say we put all this aside and just get to that? The Eternal formats tend to shift the meta at a glacial speed compared to something like Standard or Alchemy. Explorer in particular, it's very rare that new cards are introduced. New cards are introduced at the same speed as Standard, but you don't see as many cards that have impact the way you do in Standard. So the top tier metas of the Eternal formats almost never shift around. Mono Red in particular, I can't remember a time since Historic was introduced that Mono Red was not in the top 10. It's very commonly in the top 5, and it's not at all unusual for it to be king of the hill. As you can see right now, it's over 18% of the meta with a 60% win rate. That's pretty crazy, especially when you look at the next couple of decks. You're looking at about 7% on average of the meta. So mono red is typically not only present, but very strong in doing so. And that's why we are going to start with mono red today as a way of dipping our toe into that Explorer Eternal format meta. So the current meta red deck for Explorer is pretty much what we would expect it to be. Very well developed, very fine-tuned, and a little intensive on wild cards with multiple 4 of rares and mythics. But there's still some things here that we can learn and use for a more informed and more comprehensive decision as we start to build this deck from a budget perspective. First off, there are a couple of cards here that come to us directly from the current Standard environment. Kamano and a Lightning Strike. These should pretty much already be in your budget Standard collection, but still fit very nicely and at no real cost in doing so. I believe there's other things in Standard that could have a similar effect for us. Then we have, like we said, a bunch of rares and mythics and things like that going on, which may or may not fit into our final analysis. But I think in particular, Light Up the Stage here is a lower wildcard intensity, but also does a lot for red decks in both Historic and Explorer, and is definitely worth our consideration. As we look at the deck, land here is pretty simple. In fact, you can very comfortably run just mountains. I think that's what we're going to end up doing today. And the reason this deck is such a good place to start is if you look at these creatures, there's a lot of very versatile designs in there. A lot of different ways you can go. Fanatical Firebrand, for instance, is an easy, no-cost addition for us. Things like Rabbit Battery still doing work. The Phoenix Chick still doing work. And very similar in the instants and sorceries that are available. There's just so many different options that you can go with, and that trend continues all the way down into enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, and even the lands. There's just so many different ways you can take this deck that making small investments incrementally over time is really a great way to get into those eternal formats. All right, so let's take a couple minutes and go through the deck list for this week's midweek Magic. Mono red is just one of those things that becomes ubiquitous in really any format at any budget level. Sooner or later, everybody builds mono red, whether they want to or not. And the first thing I really want to focus on with this deck is it's intended as a starting point and is built from the standpoint of someone who just started playing and has very limited resources, but wants to participate in an Explorer midweek Magic so they can get those 2 free ICRs. The short version is, if you have been playing longer, you certainly can build mono red in 1,000 different ways. There's no necessarily right way to do it. At any given time, the historic or the explorer meta has 5 or 6 different very effective builds of mono red. So this is a place to start your thinking and start your building, and is not necessarily the correct answer for every single person out there. Now, let's actually go through the card choices here. We have a heavy influence from Dominaria United in cards like Flowstone Infusion, Twinferno, Thrill of Possibilities, Lightning Strike, and of course Electrostatic Infantry, which is kind of the star of this deck. It's all about landing him, using your spells to pump him up, and then hopefully using him to beat your opponent to death. You'll also see things like Squee in here. This is not necessarily an easy card to draft, but is very low-hanging fruit when it comes to the jump-in package for Dominaria United. This is one of those packs that I think is very favorable for most players. We also have some things in here from your new player experience. Kamano, Phoenix Chick is actually from Dominaria United, excuse me for having overlooked that. But Play with Fire and Rabbit Battery, both from your new player experience. And 3 copies of Shock, which we tend to think of as an alchemy card, but in actuality is Explorer legal, even though it comes to us in our alchemy-driven new player experience monocolor decks. A Braid and a Smoldering Egg, also from the new player experience, Reckless Stormseeker, and Atsushi. The mana base here is pretty darn simple. We've got 19 Mountains and Crystal Grotto in there, mostly for the scry effect, although getting this as a colorless mana generally isn't too punishing. Even if the 1 copy is in there, it doesn't really hinder your ability to cast Atsushi on curve there. The only time it might run in is if you're trying to do multiple 1-drops, like 3 in the same turn kind of thing, but that's pretty corner case. Now, as far as tuning this a little bit more towards Explorer and helping grow your collection, we've got 4 cards for you to consider here. The first is a common Fanatical Firebrand, and the good news is this isn't even going to cost you a wild card. You can use the code Shiny Goblin Pirate to not only get this really cool cosmetic version, but also your first copy of the card in the event that you don't already own one. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with codes, you owe it to yourself to check out my comprehensive codes video that comes out every new set and literally unlocks tons of value for you for absolutely no resources other than your time. From there, we've got Gitu Lava Runner as a single copy in a deck built around electrostatic infantry and trying to use those instants and sorceries. This is a fantastic slot at common, a 1/2 that becomes a 2/2 with haste if you happen to have an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. Excuse me, that is in fact 2 instants or sorceries in your graveyard. From there, we've got one of the utility lands. This can enter the battlefield tapped, which is a possible tempo tax, but also generates red mana. Alternatively, you can cast it as an instant and sacrifice a creature. If you do so, the Fury deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. And this is really cool to let you close out the game. You've got a big electrostatic infantry who's getting in for some damage through his trample. It's too big for your opponent to deal with. And you've got him down within range. And then you sack it to Fury and deal that last little bit of damage to put you in over the top. Last wildcard that I think is an absolute must-have for red decks in particular, in both Historic and Explorer, is Light Up the Stage, an uncommon sorcery. Exile the top 2 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play those cards. So it's functionally red card draw, which is just not something we see often enough. And the really nice thing about this is it can be very mana efficient. It has Spectacle and a single red, meaning that if your opponent has taken damage, you can cast this spell for 1 red mana instead of 2 and a red, allowing you to have even more mana up to then turn around and cast this. If you are planning on casting this, my suggestion is don't play your land card until after you've cast this, because you may draw a land off Light Up the Stage, which then you can play easily and allow you to continue chaining your spells. So that's the deck. We're talking about an investment here of 1 common and 2 uncommon wild cards. Everything else here is very obtainable through the standard grind, and I think this is a great deck to kind of dip your toe in to explore and start exploring that format, all puns intended, without having to make big investments to do so.
What's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt would like you to know that any deck list applicable to this video can be found down in the doobly-doo. Hey, let's not forget, the whole reason to participate in these totally free midweek Magic events is the prize support is awesome. And don't forget, if this video gets just 10 likes by 8 p.m. tonight on the day of release, I will be live playing this on my Twitch channel. And with all that having been said, don't forget, smash that like button like Ronnie J would. And until next time, I'll see you in the arena.